It's the bloodiest battle on the history of American soil. It's been called the Altar of America. It was the Battle at Gettysburg. It took place in 1863. We're here this week to do a new series called The High Ground at Gettysburg. And tonight on the No Shame podcast, I'm going to tell you all about it. I'm John Grooters, and this is No Shame.
Got no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid, no shame.
Hello and welcome to the No Shame podcast. I'm Shelby.
I'm John.
And you're here joining us today in beautiful Gettysburg. Currently, you are in our tech room. This is where we have all of our tech. We have our, what are those called? Walkie-talkies back here.
Walkie-talkies.
It's been a long day.
The follow focus on the couch and a Ronin over there. And anyway, a lot of batteries charging in here.
And this was our makeshift, hey, let's throw together a podcast this week because
this is our professional studio podcast here from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
So John, tell us a little bit about what we're doing here this week.
Yeah, well, okay. So normally on our podcast, I like to interview other people, but we pretty much had no one here tonight, so Shelby's going to interview me. But we are having a fascinating week. This is my first trip to Gettysburg. Have you been here before?
Nope, never.
All right, well, I'll just say this. This place is so legit. I mean, skip Disneyland with your kids. Seriously, bring them here. I am blown away by what I've been here 6 days now, 3 days in pre-pro, and now we've been filming for 2 days. We've got 3 more days here to film. It won't be nearly enough time for me to absorb it all. This place is incredible. If you've never visited Gettysburg, I'm like on the tourist bureau now. There are thousands of monuments put up to regiments from all the states. There are statues. There is so much history here. You just kind of can't quite imagine. The picture I had in my mind was so much smaller. And it's one of those places where it's not enough just to drive through and say, I saw it. You have to step into it in order to get everything you can get out of it. The learning is essential. So we're lucky we're here with a real expert, a guy by the name of Jay Lorenzen. Jay's been leading tours here for more than 20 years. In the spring and in the fall, he'll lead several tours of 30 people each for a week. And he takes them through the story of Gettysburg, and he does a leadership conference. He's teaching leaders lessons that can be learned from what went well and what didn't go so well over the 3 days of July 1, July 2, and July 3 of 1863. And it was at that time that, interestingly enough, the Confederate Army led by Robert E. Lee was actually coming from the north, even though they were the Southern Army. And the Army of the Potomac, or the Union Army, led by George Meade, was coming from the south. And Gettysburg is this little town that just happens to be like the hub of a wheel. And there are spokes from this little town, 10 different roads. So it was this natural place of convergence. And so it just so happened that, in the third year of the Civil War, this is really the main battle of the Civil War. And incredible numbers of people, 90,000 troops from the Union side, 70,000 troops from the Confederate side, plus they were traveling with 10,000 slaves who did all their cooking and who did all the work to support the army. So you're looking at, a massed group of people that is, over 160,000 people who are going to meet in battle, and over 50,000 men will die in 3 days.
Yeah.
Did you have any idea of the carnage of Gettysburg?
No, I mean, yesterday when we first started filming here, we were walking through the cemetery, and you just see headstone after headstone after headstone. And the craziest piece to me was seeing so many headstones say unknown.
Right.
I think that's like probably the most heart-wrenching thing, just because I think we think of headstones kind of as these monuments, these pillars to people who are fallen and those who have lived lives on this earth. And for people to have a gravestone that says unknown and to have their families not know where they fell, but doing such an honorable thing for their country and for something that they believed in and taking care of their brothers. It's just, yeah, I had no idea the vast amount of people who gave their lives in this battle.
So you're talking about what they call the National Cemetery.
Yep.
It obviously didn't exist here because Gettysburg was a small town of 2,500 people that never knew it was going to be famous for a battle any more than you'd think your hometown or my hometown will somehow be famous for some war. It was not.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful town of farms and rich fields and lovely hills. And those those gravestones that say unknown, they are laid with their regiments because they would fall next to each other. So even though they wouldn't have all the names, they would know they were part of, the 20th Maine was the one we were looking at yesterday, which was Joshua Chamberlain's regiment. So the monuments here are not usually to individuals. Mm-hmm. This isn't the same kind of hero culture. And I was thinking about our sports culture in a way, that even though we were watching team sports, the marketing became all about the individual. Who's the MVP of the whole league? Well, really the game was about teams, but the way ESPN and others marketed it was just to pick out a big argument about the 2 or 3 people for the MVP of the league. Superstars is the American way, right?
Yeah.
But in the Civil War, there weren't going to be superstars. These were regiments fighting with one another, and no one was going to be more important than the other. Now there's a command strategy that there's lieutenants and generals and majors and all the way up, but the monuments that are everywhere over these acres are mostly, and again, there are some individuals there's a lot of statues, but mostly it's these companies and these regiments. And I thought, my goodness, they died together as a team. They fought together as a team. That's evident by the way they remembered one another. And the cemetery that you're talking about, so the war happens, and they're just bodies by the thousands. We filmed a scene today where, through the error of the commander of the company who didn't lead them well, he leads this North Carolina regiment right into a field where, up from the other side where he didn't know there was a Union army, they rise up, and in 10 minutes, 5,000 of them are dead. 10 minutes. So the field is laying with bodies and blood, and they would not really be buried or be buried in makeshift graves, and then the rains come. And so shortly after Gettysburg, which is in July, Lincoln directs someone to buy land here and build something of an honor. And he comes on November 19th. So the Civil War is not over. Mm-mm. It's only 4.5 months or so since the battle, and all the governors of all the states in the North that were participating in the battle here come, along with 20,000 people, for the dedication of this cemetery, because they knew instantly, this was such a massive tragedy, such an important occasion. And so they invite Edwin Everett, who is like the most famous orator of the time, to come and give the keynote address. And I guess he's a great speaker, and he whips them all up, and he tells the stories of the battle, and he goes on for 2 hours for 20,000 people who hear him. Before him, a long invocation. It's a big solemn event, right? And again, remember, the Civil War is still going on. It doesn't be decided until 1865. Mm-hmm. So there's still going to be 2 years of war. I'm kind of like, wasn't this dangerous? Couldn't there have been snipers? But anyway, they have it here, 20,000 people, Edwin Everett. And then someone had invited the President of the United States not to come and do a campaign speech. They were worried about that, believe it or not. So they said, can you just give a few appropriate remarks? And so Lincoln comes to Gettysburg, and he works hard to put together his few appropriate remarks. And I have a copy of them here. And Shelby, I thought I'd go through what many of us might have studied at one point in life, but it's hitting me with a whole new sense of impact.
Yeah.
So this is the Gettysburg Address, as what Everett called it. It's not what Lincoln called it, but 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So interesting start. 77 years ago. A score is 20 years.
Yep.
So he's saying fourscore, that would be 80 plus 7, fourscore and 7 years ago. 87 years earlier is not the Constitution, that was 1787, but fourscore and 7 years ago, what Lincoln's referring to is the Declaration of Independence. And I never thought about that as significant, but they've been fighting a civil war because the Union is trying to be preserved against the Confederate States of America who are trying to break away. Well, what really, the birth of the nation was really the Constitution, the ratification of the Constitution in 1787. But Jay Lorenzen, who's the expert who we're here to film, has taught us the Constitution was a document of some compromise. That was the Constitution talks about the Union, and in order to form a more perfect Union, the Civil War had been about Union.
Yeah.
Well, Lincoln, right off the bat, takes us back before that Union, talks about fourscore and 7 years ago. It's kind of a poetic way to say back in 1776. Our fathers brought forth a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He's talking here about a nation, not a union, a nation. And that's something that's always just gone right over my head. And he also brings it back to the essence that in the Declaration of Independence, it talks about all men are created, endowed by their Creator. And that's what he's referring to, that document of the Declaration of Independence. So he's clearly outlining an opposition to slavery right on the opening lines and saying we're going to come together as a nation. He says then, now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and dedicated can long endure. We're met on a great battlefield of that war, and we've come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. And it's altogether fitting and proper we should do this. There were some who were already... Lincoln was as hated as any president since. If you think Reagan had it bad, or if you think Trump has it bad as far as the press hating him, that's true, the press hate them, but they also hated Lincoln. And if you've ever been to the Lincoln Memorial, by the way, in Springfield, it's awesome. I highly recommend going. And there's a room that shows all the bad press Lincoln got. I had no idea. I thought we all loved Lincoln. But he had already been criticized in the press that he would come and speak at this event as if he was trying to make political hay. So when he says it's altogether fitting and proper we should do this, he's sort of answering those critics. But this is the question that I think we're still talking about really this whole summer, the summer of 2020, which is, can any nation so conceived as the United States long endure? And there's a pretty strong faction all summer long that's been saying we need to burn it down. And obviously in the 1860s, there was a huge contingent of southern states that said we need to burn down this Constitution. We need to burn down this Union. We don't like it anymore.
Yeah.
In their day, it's because they wanted the right to decide whether or not they could legally own, trade, and control the slaves.
Yep.
And that people will argue about what the Civil War is all about, and it was all about states' rights, but the rights the states wanted was the rights to own slaves. I mean, that's pretty much the long and the short of it. And you can't say all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which was the language of Jefferson in the Declaration.
Yeah.
That's in conflict with that idea that we will perpetually be slave owners. They couldn't coexist anymore.
No.
And so obviously the Civil War rages on, and there's different reasons that particular men would fight. They would just fight with their brothers, but the principles at stake, that's what they were. So Lincoln goes on, in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It's for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people and by the people and for the people shall not perish from the earth.
Sounds a lot different than our culture right now.
Wow. It sounds a lot different because for the last 6 days, I've been trying to imagine walking across this hill or across this field and pretending I could hear 17,000 rifles shooting at me, 400 cannons shooting at me, my brothers falling to my right and my left, people losing limbs, losing parts of their faces. I mean, the grossness, the pain and the struggle. And Lincoln says, we're not here to dedicate anything. This is here to dedicate us.
Yeah.
These men died. We don't consecrate them. They consecrate us. And the idea is that we need to be dedicated to the unfinished work that they so nobly advanced.
Yeah.
That's a call to me today. Like, these people are not that long ago. Do you know, my dad's dad, my grandfather, was born in 1898. My dad was born in 1939. So my grandfather, who died when I was 12, but my grandfather would have certainly known a lot of guys who fought in the Civil War. Wow. When he was 10 years old, they were probably in their 60s or so. Huh. So when I was 10 years old, I knew Uncle so. So that's how close I am.
Yeah.
You know, my grandfather would have known people who fought in the Civil War. It's not that long ago. And the idea, I mean, as we've been watching the news this summer, I mean, I think we've all kind of had a chance to think, well, what happens when this kind of unrest makes it to my doorstep? What happens if this turns violent? I mean, it has already turned violent. I guess I shouldn't say it that way. I mean, what if the violence now crashes through the barricades of whatever barricades we have, our neighborhoods, our businesses, our churches, even our homes? What happens then? Well, we've had to think about that. We've seen this kind of violence. Well, what would happen if that violence was organized into armies? Yeah. Armies, you kind of can't imagine an army of your own countrymen coming into your neighborhood to do harm to you.
Yeah.
This is hard for me to conceive of, but that's what happened in the Civil War, and it was not cool, and it was not nice, and it's not a fun thing to study because it's history.
Yeah.
You know, and here in this one battle, 3 days, like I said, over 50,000 casualties. And we've been studying the strategy. We've been studying how those 3 days went. We've been studying what happened where the tide kind of turned. The Confederacy was actually winning day one and day two, but they made a couple strategic mistakes. They could have taken high ground on day one, and they didn't. And that was a mistake. And so while they were winning, they kind of pulled back too soon. The Union had time to dig in and sort of take advantage of a nighttime where they built breastworks and they dug in positions on the top of some of these higher ridges. That left the Confederacy in the unfortunate position from their perspective of having to attack uphill, starting with on day two on both flanks. And then on day three, General Robert E. Lee decides to concentrate all of his forces to attack up the middle and try to divide the Union Army. But those attacks came from a lesser position, and the Union had the greater position. And so the Union was able to repel these waves of attacks who were trying to move uphill. And the Confederacy took massive casualties. I forget the exact percentage, but it was upwards of 55 to 60% dead.
Yeah.
The Union, in victory, took a 35% dead in victory. And I read somewhere that Napoleon at Waterloo, when finally Napoleon was defeated, he took a 16% casualty rate. So in victory, the Union and George Meade have lost 35%, the Confederacy over 55%. And so that's one of the reasons why the Union and Meade doesn't really pursue Lee when he finally retreats.
Yeah.
They kind of, I guess, from what I understand, do a little bit of a token pursuit, but they really don't have the energy. They're exhausted and they're wounded. Lincoln wasn't happy with George Meade. He'd only been appointed the commanding general like 3 days before Gettysburg, and he thought he should have And maybe he should have pursued Lee, because it's possible he could have saved 2 more years of blood and destruction and everything Sherman did. But Lee takes a massive beating here based on his own primary error in judgment. And he decides, Pickett's charge is the famous charge on that third day where he leads his whole effort right up the middle. And his most trusted general advising says, this can't be done, Robert. He says, there's not a 15,000-man army in the history of the world that can take that hill when they're dug in. Lee doesn't listen to him. Lee's got his mind made up. He's going to crush the Union right here, right now. This is his one chance. They're right in front of him. He's got to beat them. He orders them into that charge, and they get slaughtered. They just are walking into a buzzsaw. They have to cross a field that's a mile long against an enemy that can look over the stone walls and shoot them with cannon. And then they've got, it's not just a cannonball, then they've got cannonballs that explode. They've got cannonballs that explode in the air. Then they're into the range of the muskets, which by then are rifled. And as Lee realizes that he has just made a mistake, but it's more than a mistake, it's just cost tens of thousands of lives. And as the few straggling survivors come back, apparently he says, "This is all my fault. It's all my fault." So it's such a crazy situation, because now in the hindsight of what are we, 17 years later, we say, why did you guys even do this? Like, what was any of this for? And I understand Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which puts it, this is what it was for. It's that the government by the people, of the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. That's what the Union, that's what Lincoln, that's how he articulated it.
Yeah.
Some people have said that this short address, which took him 2 minutes to read, it's short, 200 words or so, 272 words, in a sense was more important than the whole battle, because he has put into words that we've all are still reading what the struggle was for at that time.
Yeah.
So powerful words, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was thinking about what you had said earlier in our culture and the fact that we make heroes. And back then, it was more of a team thing. And I was sitting with one of the guys we have here on production with us this week, Ben, and he's towards the end of his career and getting ready to retire. And I said to him, if you could impart any wisdom on me as I'm just starting out in my career, what would it be? And he said, team. Team is the most important thing. It's not about advancing yourself. It's about advancing your team. And I think that's so important in our day and age, because I feel like we have our iPhones and our Instagram, which is basically just an online shrine to ourselves. And we have all of this self-gratification and self-building. And we've lost what it means to really be a union, to be a force that is moving together against one goal, towards one goal. And I think, I don't know how to describe it really, but I think kind of that common goal is something that we as a nation have lost.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this war was something that started that, and has never really been mended, or if it happened before then. What would you say, John?
Well, when we were talking about how they seemed to be so dedicated to their regiment and that they would never elevate, with rare exceptions, one individual over the regiment, that's that sense of team. But it was also a sense of mission. So it's a team with a legitimate purpose, right? So I think we play on sports teams. I've played on sports teams. You've played on sports teams. That gives us a taste of it. Like, we have quite an interesting camaraderie that we build together with our teammates. But as much as I'm a sports fan, it's really kind of all about nothing. Like, it doesn't really matter who gets the tinsel trophy and who doesn't. Yeah. But a real team with a real mission has elevating levels, right, of actual significance that they're pursuing. So imagine being a guy with a team from Alabama, with 3 of your brothers, and somehow you're recruited to fight in this war, whether you believed in slavery or not. You're from Alabama, you don't really have a choice. And so you're recruited, and so you march. You don't get on a train. You're going to march and you're going to walk all the way from Alabama to here into Pennsylvania. So, I mean, that's quite a journey just to think of how you get here, what you wear, what you can possibly eat. And then you get close, and now what happened in the Battle of Gettysburg is they had to march 25 miles the morning before they were going to fight this battle. Mm-hmm. So I'm just thinking this is a Confederate group led by a guy named John Oates, who had 3 brothers. They were from Alabama. They're the ones who are going to be charging up on the right flank of the Confederate Army, attacking Joshua Chamberlain in the 20th Maine, on the left flank at what, the famous battle we have of Little Round Top. So I can't imagine what sense of team and brotherhood. You've come all this way.
Yeah.
And now you're not just in a game, but you're in a life and death struggle. And if your teammates don't pull their weight, if there's a hole in the line, everyone, and at the same time, you're watching your teammates. They don't foul out of the game, or, they don't get pulled because they die next to you. Mm-hmm. I heard somebody say today that, the effort that was put forth by the Confederacy, the courage and the bravery and the sacrifice was worthy of a nobler cause. Mm. And I thought that was an interesting phrase. And I thought, how many wars is that not true of? Was that not true of Germans even in World War II who end up showing bravery and courage in a horrible cause, the cause of Hitler and fascism? Was that not true of kamikaze fighters from Japan?
Yeah.
In World War II? In World War I, did anybody know what they were fighting for? Like, was there any cause? And then maybe war forever, it does bring out human qualities of the highest energy and the highest maybe quality, but so often it's not for the right mission. And it's for a mission that I would say has been distorted or twisted or even possibly manipulated by the principalities and powers of this present age, the darkness powers of the world. And I believe in those things. I believe the Bible says we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers. But when they get a hold of people, it ends up being flesh and blood.
Yeah.
But it started off in some, I think possibly very dark place. And maybe that's what we have to always be so prayerful and diligent against. Do not fall prey to those things, but keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep your eyes on the Lord and live the way he taught us to live.
Yeah. And
that doesn't mean that there's not evil. There is evil.
Oh, absolutely.
And that doesn't mean that, as David says in the Psalms, where are those who will resist evil with me? Where are they? It doesn't mean that a believer in God runs from the battlefield. I have brothers and friends who are legitimate pacifists, and I respect them. But myself, I don't theologically believe you run away from evil and let it rule the day. That there is a time where Jesus says, "Greater love hath no man, that he lay down his life for his friends." I think that was happening in the Civil War, but I wish it was always for a cause that was worth laying your life down for.
Yeah.
And I like the way Abraham Lincoln gave us the words to say, I think a government by the people, of the people, and for the people, a government built on liberty and the idea that all men are created equal, to me, that's probably a cause that's about as high as the civic world will ever have.
Yeah. I think it's interesting what you're saying kind of about the Imago Day. I think about Imago Day and the fact that Satan brings those lies into our heads to bring us against something that can show us the image of God, which is our brother.
Right.
Right? And the biggest thing that he can pin us against is our brother. And that division we see it running rampant all around the world. I mean, we talk to people in our work who are across the pond, and they're having these problems of division as well. And so it's so interesting to me to watch it unfold and to learn more about how it is unfolded in history, because history keeps telling itself over and over and over. The goal is that we would learn from our history, but we end up repeating it, right? Isn't that so true? But I think I wanted to go a little bit into the leadership and talking about what Jay has been teaching us while we've been here. You've been here a little bit longer than me, working on pre-pro, but he's really honed into this, what makes a good leader, into the war at Gettysburg. And tell me a little bit about that and his perspective.
So what we're filming is going to ultimately be a series called The High Ground at Gettysburg, or The Leaders of Gettysburg Take the High Ground, or something like that. And, there's a lot of lessons that are going to come out over these maybe 6 episodes. One of the ones we've looked at today is this idea called foresight and the ability to see what's coming. And there were a few men who got to this region early, one of them by the name of John Buford, who was a cavalry leader for the Union Army. And he was one of the first on the battlefield. And he somehow, in a bunch of, this looks to me like just hills and farmland. To be honest with you, I would have not had a clue. But he knows instantly, these are the ridges, this is the terrain, this is the spot that you have to have. So he sees all this with his eyes. And he's got about, 2,000 men or something like that. And there's 20,000 Confederate soldiers coming down the road. And he sends for the infantry and John Reynolds. But John Reynolds is 8 miles away. And John Reynolds has 10,000 infantry. So 10,000 is a better number against 20. It's still not enough. But he knows that he's 8 miles away. And to move those, it's at least 2 hours. They couldn't just drive here. They have to walk here. And so Buford recognizes he's got to use his cavalry and the few people he has to figure out a way to slow down the advance of a 20,000-member army coming under the command of a guy named Heth, I think it was, who's coming from the northwest. And if he can slow them down long enough to get Reynolds' infantry here, if they can slow them down long enough, what they don't want is to just get blown back and lose the high hills that they recognize are what they have to defend ultimately. So they start the battle out here and try to slow it down. And Reynolds does arrive, and Buford does slow them down enough, because this is interesting. I didn't know this. If you're fighting in a war in this day, what you don't want is to get caught in a straight line with people shooting at you. You want to open up and get caught in a broad line. So this is in column. If the camera is where my guns are, they want to face you this way so that when you shoot at them, your bullets or your cannonballs can only go through one piece of the line. If you're down this way and they put a cannonball, it can kind of topple a lot of people. I would have thought a line was harder to hit, but they want to go. So what happens when Buford and his cavalry start shooting as they're coming down the road? The Confederates have to move from in a column. They have to pivot in line, and that takes time to rotate 20,000 people. Yeah. So they do get slowed down, and then John Reynolds, who is a very famous guy, comes along, brings his 10th, but he's killed 10 minutes into the battle. He takes a bullet right in the back of the head. They lose their leader. Anyway, this is some of the stuff I learned about the Civil War this week. I'm not a Civil War expert, but boy, I've been learning a lot. And essentially, they slowed them down enough that they didn't concede the high ground. Had that not happened, then the whole battle comes out differently. So the leader's job, in this case, Buford and Reynolds and others, a guy named Gouverneur K. Warren, they just were able to see the ground, and you want to take the high ground. I'm thinking, as he's talking about this, also about the obvious parallel with the moral high ground. Like, if you don't have the moral high ground, I don't think ultimately you're going to win. That's just my belief system talking. Yeah. I once heard a person say, you should never enter a war unless both the national interest is definitively at stake and you have the moral high ground. You shouldn't enter a war for only one or the other. Yeah. Like, even though it might be right and someone's doing horrible things in some part of the world, to send soldiers and troops to die for that, man, I don't know. I don't know about that. I think maybe that's where... or if you say, well, it's in the national interest for us to go take all the gold from this country and become rich, well, that might be in the national interest, but it doesn't have the moral high ground. in certain cases where you would say, boy, the interest of all these people, these innocent people is at stake, and morally it's the thing to do, then maybe that's where you take that thing. So today we're talking about the leaders who can find the high ground, who know how to set up the terrain so that you're going to get there. To me, there's a moral equivalent to that too.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. So much to take in.
It really is.
It really, really is. Wow. I wanted to say one last thing. Wanted to talk about America Studios a little bit. Your heart for history is obviously huge. Seeing that you have kind of taken in all of this and really have kind of created I'm losing words. Hold on a second. You've created for yourself this kind of network of people who also support this dream to see the nation back in what Lincoln was talking about. Talk to me a little bit about America Studios and how this Gettysburg project has kind of opened your eyes to new potentials for America Studios.
Yeah, Shelby, I love to talk about that. I'm wearing one of the hats, which is probably really gross right now. But America Studios, we're launching it. I mean, it's a dream right now. And we've written a couple of movie scripts. We've just shot a scene from what we hope will be our next film called 9 Days a Soldier. And we'll be posting that very soon on the 9 Days a Soldier page on America Studios. I hope you can all take a look at that. It's really cool to see one scene of a movie, and I love it. And as we are launching America Studios, which is an idea that says we just want to tell the great stories.
Yeah.
We don't want to tell them with bias. We're not trying to sort of pick a political side, but we want to tell the great stories. There were great stories that were part of the forging of the nation that broke through the monarchy, the nation that broke through the caste system. There were great stories that were about the formation of a nation that developed a government by the people, of the people, for the people, a nation that said all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. These weren't concepts that were being done anywhere else on the planet. And it did come together after the Great Awakening and after the Enlightenment. And there was a time and place where these ideas of faith and enlightenment kind of merged together, and they sparked. And they broke through the caste system of Europe, and they broke through the control over the church that Europe had. And they did enough with the king telling us what we can do and what we can't do and getting rich off of us. We'll take liberty, which is messy, which there's no guarantees. We want to take our chances on liberty. Mm. And that, in my opinion, along with what came along with the free market, is what gave a chance for a people to not only prosper beyond what any other nation in the history of the world had prospered, but also gave the basis for a nation that could self-correct its own inevitable errors. I mean, people are sinful, and we're going to make mistakes, and there's going to be crime, and there's going to be horrible things. So the perfect constitution or the perfect government doesn't change the sinful nature of man at all. Yeah. Instead, it recognizes it. And it says, because men are sinful, don't give anyone too much power. They'll abuse it. So diffuse the power, make it difficult to make laws, make sure all people are under the rule of law and nobody is above it. Mm. Well, I still think those are good ideas. I think those are better ideas than monarchy, oligarchy, other forms of government. Yep. That's just me personally, but nevertheless, I think if those ideas were persuasive in those days, persuasive enough that people gave up everything to pursue them, shouldn't we at least listen again to what motivated them? Yeah. And what if we could find really cool stories of, true situations where something happened to somebody and it was somehow based on the principles of the time, maybe the hand of Providence comes into play. So America Studios has a whole slate of movies and TV series that we're trying to develop along those lines. So it was really cool when we got a call that says there's this guy named Jay Lorenzen, and he's been teaching lessons on leadership on the fields of Gettysburg for 20 years, and somebody should record this guy's teaching because he's amazing. Would you be willing to do it? And we said, well, we'd love to do it. We've done in a sense, similar work for years with Ray Vanderlaan, who's an incredible Bible teacher. And we've now done 80 episodes with Ray for That the World May Know. So, and we've done other leaders as well. So we've had an experience finding a person who's an expert on a subject and then trying to capture their knowledge and their passion and their situation and their context through film. And now in this current sort of passion of mine to say, let's tell the great stories. Well, Gettysburg is one of them. And I didn't know much about it. I'm not a historian. I have no degree. So I've been diving into reading and connecting as much as I can with the story. So I think Gettysburg is one of the great stories. Jay Lorenzen's a really wonderful guy, and he's become a friend over the last week. He's really got some great insights on leadership. We're not doing a movie on Gettysburg. We're not trying to do the definitive history. I'm not trying to do another Ken Burns series. Jay's specific slice of the pie is what can we learn not only from the good leaders like Buford, but also there were leaders that made critical errors here. And you sort of see what happens when you make an error based on all the different things here and how that can ripple and hurt people. So Jay's drawing lessons from both sides. So yeah, if you want to look at what we're doing, go to americastudios.com, and we'll give you updates on this Gettysburg project along the way, and hopefully, God willing, some others as well.
There you go. And if you want to take a trip to Gettysburg, it might as well be with Jay Lorenzen.
Jay and Lori Lorenzen, yeah, they're great.
And if you can't come to Gettysburg, watch our documentary
That's
that we're
right.
going to have. So I think that's all for today. We need to get to bed because we have an early morning tomorrow morning shooting some more of this stuff. But thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thank you.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid. No shame of the gospel of His name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid.
No Shame is a weekly podcast where John Grooters discusses life at the intersection of faith and culture with all kinds of interesting and inspiring guests. Subscribe to the podcast today by going to johngrooters.com, select the podcast tab, and hit subscribe. Don't miss any of these life-giving conversations.